There is a very familiar moment that almost no one ever puts into words. You're walking, maybe after dinner, maybe doing a loop around your neighborhood, or maybe just stealing a few minutes in the middle of a busy day, and while your feet keep moving at a steady pace, your hand unconsciously rests on your abdomen. Not to check muscle tone, but to ask a very honest question. Is what I'm doing actually changing anything inside my body? Or am I just comforting myself with the idea that walking is good? That question doesn't come from laziness. It comes from a repeated experience shared by many people. They walk consistently, they're patient, they believe they're doing the right thing, yet the things they were taught to expect to see quickly, a smaller waist, obvious weight loss, the sensation of fat melting away, never appear. And so, very naturally, they conclude that walking isn't strong enough, isn't intense enough, isn't powerful enough to change the body in a world where everything is promised to work fast. What almost no one tells you is that visceral fat, the fat that actually matters for metabolic health and long-term disease risk, never gives you visual proof that you're on the right path. It doesn't shrink under your hand. It doesn't disappear in the mirror after a few weeks. It sits deep inside, operating quietly, and it responds only to very specific changes in the body's biological environment, not to your sense of effort and not to human impatience. That's why so many people quit, not because they're doing something wrong, but because they're being forced to judge a deep biological process using surface-level measures that were never designed for it. If you've ever felt like you were walking and nothing was happening, it's very possible that a lot was happening, you were just never taught where to look. To understand why walking can affect visceral fat, we have to completely change the starting point of the story. Not the legs, not the abdominal muscles, but the liver. The liver is the energy decision-making center of the entire body. It isn't just a detox organ the way we often hear, it's a biological command center, constantly coordinating fuel flow in the background without your awareness. Every minute, the liver reads signals from hormones, from the nervous system, from the gut, from muscles, and answers survival-level questions. Is there glucose left from the last meal? Is insulin high or low? Is this energy demand real or temporary? Should fuel be stored or released? Visceral fat has a special relationship with the liver because most of its breakdown products are delivered directly to the liver through the portal vein. This means visceral fat isn't just a passive storage depot, it's a powerful signaling source that influences how the liver makes decisions. When visceral fat accumulates, the liver is constantly receiving the message that energy is abundant, that the environment may be unstable, and its natural response is to prioritize storage, defense, and holding on rather than letting go. This is why visceral fat is so tightly linked to insulin resistance, metabolic dysfunction, and cardiovascular risk, not because it is bad in a moral sense, but because it signals a system living in a prolonged state of vigilance. One of the most common and most disappointing misunderstandings is the belief that walking or exercise can burn fat by directly targeting the abdominal area. Biology doesn't work that way. The body has no concept of spot-burning fat according to your intention. It operates on a cold, rational energy budget logic. Blood glucose is cash, easy to use, low risk. Liver and muscle glycogen are short-term reserves. Fat is long-term savings. And visceral fat is part of that savings account, kept not because the body is lazy, but because it considers it a strategic safety buffer. Walking doesn't choose which account to withdraw from. It simply sends a signal that the environment has changed, only if that signal is clear, consistent, and not overridden by opposing signals such as high insulin, chronic stress, or lack of sleep does the liver begin to change its spending rules. And only when those rules change does visceral fat gradually become unnecessary. Here is an uncomfortable but crucial truth. Many people walk while simultaneously sending their bodies conflicting signals. They walk in a state of stress and self-pressure, worrying the entire time about whether it's working. They walk right after meals that spike insulin. They walk too hard, gasping for breath, strongly activating the sympathetic nervous system. Then they're surprised when visceral fat doesn't change. But the body isn't contradictory. It simply responds honestly to the total signal it receives. If the overall message is danger, it will hold on to fat, especially visceral fat, because that is precisely its protective function. When you begin walking, in the first few minutes, what happens is not fat burning, but risk assessment. Your survival system is watching. Energy demand rises suddenly, and the safest response is to use the most accessible fuels to avoid mistakes. Glucose in the blood, some circulating fatty acids, and stored muscle fuel. At this stage, many people feel disappointed because they don't sense that something is happening. But in reality, this quietness is a sign that the system is functioning correctly. The body is not designed to change strategy based on a short-term signal. It needs confirmation. If you continue walking, after several minutes, heart rate and breathing begin to stabilize. This is a biologically critical moment that many people never notice. As physiological rhythms settle, the nervous system lowers its guard. The liver begins to understand that this is not an emergency. And it is precisely this sense of safety that allows metabolic systems to shift. Mitochondria in muscle cells gradually increase their use of fat as fuel, not because you've hit a magical minute count, but because the body has gathered enough trust to change its settings. This is where the myth that you must walk 20-30 minutes to burn fat needs to be corrected. Fat is always being used to some degree, but only when the system is stable does the proportion of fat rise enough to matter metabolically. Around 10 to 20 minutes in, another gate begins to open. For stored fat to be used, fat cells must be unlocked through hormonal signals. Insulin functions like a do not withdraw sign. When insulin is high, the biological message is that energy is abundant, and there is no need to tap into long-term savings. In contrast, mobilizing hormones such as catecholamines promote the release of fat. In the context of steady, non-strenuous walking, insulin typically does not rise significantly, while mobilization signals remain sufficient to activate lipolysis. This is the point at which the body shifts from rapid fuel handling to a long-distance mode. Many people experience this as a lighter feeling in their movement, an easier rhythm of breathing, without realizing that internally, a major reorganization is taking place. Roughly 20 to 40 minutes is a time window in which many important biological conditions tend to converge. Not because there is a hidden clock, but because by this point the system has gathered enough information. Insulin tends to be lower than at the start, especially if you did not just eat a sugar-heavy meal. Energy demand has lasted long enough to be considered real, and the intensity, if you are walking correctly, remains gentle enough not to trigger an emergency response. This is when visceral fat begins to make a more meaningful contribution to total energy use. Not because the body decides to burn belly fat, but because visceral fat, with its high metabolic activity, becomes more available in a favorable hormonal environment. This also explains why walking too hard, gasping for breath, climbing steep inclines can sometimes be less effective for visceral fat, even though you feel exhausted. Biology does not reward suffering. It rewards the right signal. Another important point is that this process does not end the moment you stop. Fat oxidation can remain elevated above resting levels for some time afterward. But the greatest value is not in a few minutes of afterburn. It lies in the accumulated shift in how the body makes decisions over time. When you repeat walking sessions with the same appropriate biological rhythm, the body gradually becomes more flexible. It switches between glucose and fat more smoothly, relies less on high insulin, and needs visceral fat less as a strategic safety buffer. This is a long-term adaptation, quiet but durable. Visceral fat does not disappear because it is forced out. It disappears when it is no longer necessary. In the survival picture, the body redraws each day. If, listening to this, you realize that the problem was never that you weren't trying hard enough, that recognition is not a disappointment, it is a release, because most of the exhaustion surrounding fat loss, especially visceral fat, does not come from the body itself, but from a prolonged psychological struggle between our expectations and how biology actually works. We are taught that we must see results before we believe we are on the right path, while the body is designed to change only when it feels sufficiently safe. Walking, in the end, is not a test of willpower. It is a quiet dialogue between you and your own survival system. Each step is not an effort to burn something away, but a repeated signal that your living environment is becoming more stable, your pace of life is slowing just enough, and there is no need to hold on to excessive reserves for imagined threats. When you understand this, many behaviors once labeled as discipline suddenly become lighter. You don't need to force yourself to walk faster to feel worthy. You don't need to blame yourself on days when you walk less. The body does not keep a ledger session by session. It reads long-term trends, and those trends form only when you stop treating walking as a repair tool and begin to treat it as part of ordinary life. One of the greatest shifts occurs when people stop viewing their bodies as something that must be controlled. Visceral fat, in this context, is no longer an enemy to be destroyed, but an indicator that the body has lived in a state of vigilance for too long. As vigilance decreases, as signals of safety are sent consistently, visceral fat naturally becomes redundant. It does not vanish in a dramatic instant. It withdraws gradually, like a security system being dismantled when an area is no longer dangerous. The irony is that the more you try to force this process, the more likely you are to send the opposite signal. Stress, anxiety, fixation on outcomes, all of these are read by the nervous system as threats. And the body, very honestly, will hold on to what it believes is necessary to protect you. This is why many people only begin to see real change when they stop fighting their bodies and start cooperating with them. If there is one important question you can carry with you after this video, it is not, have I walked long enough? But what signals am I sending to my body every day? That signal doesn't come only from how many minutes you walk, but from how you eat, how you sleep, how you respond to stress, and how you speak to yourself. Walking has power not because it burns a lot of calories, but because it is one of the few activities that can regulate metabolism without triggering biological alarms. It is gentle enough not to send the body into panic, consistent enough for the liver to trust that the energy demand is real, and sustainable enough to change how the system makes decisions over time. When these conditions come together, visceral fat no longer has a strategic role. And when something no longer has a role, biology is always very efficient at removing it. You may never have a dramatic moment standing in front of the mirror and seeing a sudden transformation. But you may notice that you feel less fatigued, experience fewer unconscious cravings, have more stable blood sugar, sleep more deeply, and regain a sense of control over your life in a very ordinary way. These changes are not flashy, but they are signs of a system that is functioning properly. And it is precisely these signs that create the foundation for visceral fat to withdraw, not because you commanded it to, but because the body no longer needs it. If you've been on this journey before, or if you're somewhere between doubt and patience right now, share your experience in the comments. Not to show off results, but to remind each other that biology does not operate according to sensational headlines. It operates through signals, through time, and through consistency. And if you want to continue understanding your body in this way without exaggeration, without fear-mongering, without promises of miracles, then stay with the channel. Not to chase short-term motivation, but to build a healthy enough relationship with your body where you no longer have to wonder whether each step you take has meaning or not.